Hello, Oak Bloke here, and this is a video covering a new idea, which is DHC. So this is an article that hasn't been published yet and will be published in the next couple of days. So you're seeing it here first on my YouTube channel, and this is covering an idea that is as the name suggests, it's a um, healthcare diagnostics firm that also does radiology and covers a couple of different territories, mainly Egypt. So you can see here in quarter 1, so that's January to March this year, 1.8 million patients, 85,000 in Jordan, 26,000 in Nigeria, and a mere 5,000 in Saudi Arabia. And I think whilst there is a fifth country of Sudan, they've got one branch open. The rest of them are closed because of the war, and no reportable numbers. So let's assume that was zero. But yeah, mainly Egypt. But this is a kind of a fairly steady operation in Jordan. They've been in Jordan a long time. Nigeria has been a turnaround. Historically has made some losses, but now is on the cusp of profit making. And as you can see here, growing fast, 39% revenue growth compared to a year ago. And Saudi Arabia is brand new and expanding fast, and the rate of expansion is pretty impressive. Now, the half-year results might be out in the morning, but are going to be out, if not tomorrow, the next day or the day after that. It shot up today. Don't know why. It has been going up the last few days, so perhaps there's some news afoot. Who knows? Or perhaps we'll see the results tomorrow. But you can see it's kind of back to sort of 1-year highs, I guess you could say. But if you look over a longer picture, the 15% rise is nothing compared to where it was historically. $3.75 would be about 7.5 times the share price of what it is today. So this puts it 50 cents, puts it on a 286 million market cap. I wrote this article over the weekend, so I guess I've probably done it at 42 cents. So you'll have to bear with me that some of the numbers are going to be slightly obviously based upon the time of writing. But yeah, I mean, the background to this is a truly forgotten stock as far as I can see. Nobody's chatting about it on the chatosphere. It gets kind of short shrift in the review sites. It's too complicated to look at. But I kind of looked at it and went, well, it's not that complicated. Now, it is true to say that because this is focused very much on Egypt, we obviously need to consider Egypt. So a couple of fun facts that you may or may not know. One fact is that there are many more Egyptians compared to even just 10 years ago. So 15 million population growth in 10 years is pretty impressive. And there's quite a lot of Egyptians that will work overseas and send money home. And quite a lot that will work in places like the tourist resorts and send money home. So that sort of idea of sending money back to the family is a little bit similar to, I suppose, Mexico and the US. Similar sort of situation. There have been quite a number of reforms. The Egyptian economy is a bit of a strange one. So remittances are now topping 33 billion, which is obviously a large amount of money, and foreign direct investments also a feature. So the UAE, for example, invested 30 billion into the Egyptian economy in the past year. There is a little bit of a history of, and you can see there, that's the population growth. So that's the extra 15 million. So about 107, 108 million people in Egypt. Economic growth is strong. You can see there was obviously a bounce back post-COVID. a little bit of a fall here, and we can see growing economy into the years ahead, or growing forecast economy into the years ahead. It's also true to say that Egyptian exports are growing fast. So these are in, this is a crucial point. This is in US dollar terms, that exports have more than doubled in 10 years. So you can see obviously here was a high point. This drop here largely is down to a couple of features and impacts from the Houthis, from the Evergreen disaster with the tanker that got, or the shipping container ship that got stuck, that ran aground. So there's obviously a couple of reasons why this export number has dropped, but generally compound annual growth rate of 5.7 per year. And you can see here, that had an impact of about 6 billion, disruption to trade, different things going on. The IMF have stepped in to help Egypt. The Egyptian pound is now freely floating. It was for quite a while being controlled by the Egyptian government. So you had a kind of like Argentina, where you had an official exchange rate, and then you had a real exchange rate, or a black market exchange rate, that now no longer exists. They've allowed it to free float, but by allowing it to free float, the reforms and the different things have obviously tanked the exchange rate to some extent, which is why if you go on holiday to Egypt, you can have a very cheap holiday. Interest rates are at about 24%, inflation's at 14, which sounds horrific, but that's actually far down on where it was. So everything's heading in the right direction. There is an oddity as well around the Egyptian economy, in as much as the Egyptian military play a very active role in the economy. So you'd imagine the military should buy weapons, maintain an army, a navy, and an air force, and stuff like that. But there's kind of a bit of a strange situation where the Egyptian military run various businesses, profit from those various businesses, and buy the tanks and maintain the army, the navy, and the air force out of the proceeds of running these different businesses. They pay no tax to the government. So the upshot of that is that they can run businesses, crowding out private enterprise. They can run businesses. So, if they chose to start doing diagnostics, then international, IDHC would be in trouble, and probably the military would, because they're not paying any tax, be able to undercut and win out the market, and so on. So there is always a risk to this idea. But at the same time, I mean, IDHC has been around for a long time. I say a long time. They've been in business a great many years, and that hasn't happened as yet. So I suppose you've got to consider that risk, but it's not a risk that has happened yet. And if anything, there's more of an appetite now to stabilize the economy, to introduce private enterprise, to not make the mistakes of the past of running very large kind of projects that are, like, I suppose you might call them vanity projects, that that ultimately are not profitable, that they're allowing private enterprise and I suppose the other factor here is the Arab Spring back in 2011 obviously had a big impact into Egypt and all of North Africa, and there's still a bit of a memory of that in the mind of the Egyptians. Last but not least, obviously the whole area around the war between Hamas and Israel, and the invasion of Israel, and Egypt's role in mediating in that behind the scenes, means that to some extent they've got a little bit of free reign with the US, because the US obviously see them as an ally. So kind of allows them to get away with things that they might not otherwise get away with. And similarly with the EU, because the EU are actually paying 200 million a year to Egypt to control immigration. So from countries, that I suppose, where people might pass through Egypt, that they're actually turning people back and different things. So is there a fragility? I suppose arguably yes. Is there reason for optimism? Yes, as well. So I've kind of thought quite carefully about the Egyptian economy. But I mean, it's about 80-20, 80% Egypt and 20% other countries. And the other countries are growing. So, give it another year or two. And I would say you're looking at a 25 to 75 split. And in any case, the Egyptian economy is growing strong and heading in the right direction. So I said the exchange rate had collapsed. So this is again a 10-year picture of kind of what's happened there with so back in the day, British pound to the sterling, sorry, British pound to the Egyptian pound. So you would get 10 Egyptian pounds to a British pound. So a British pound was, an Egyptian pound was 10p. It's now sort of, an Egyptian pound is about 3p, or no, sorry, sorry, it's not 3p, it's 1.5p. So it's collapsed by about a factor of 6 times. So but I mean, if you do things like good old Big Mac index, the Big Mac in Egypt, so this is delivered, and bearing in mind that this is a luxury item in Egypt, it's not an everyday purchase. It would set you back 285 Egyptian pounds, which is £4.36. So it's about 70% cheaper than the UK. I mean, what I mean by that is if you went to your favorite delivery service, you would be paying somewhere in the region of about 11 or 12 pounds for that to be delivered to your doorstep, whereas it's delivered to your Egyptian doorstep for £4 and 36p. So IDHC, as I say, it was on a much higher level than today. So this article I wrote, it was at 43. As I say, it's now at 50. Can't really help the fact that events move. And it's jumped, so it's jumped quite a bit since the 1st of August. So obviously that number's higher now as well. The price earnings basis would put it at 8.3 times earnings. Some places might say that they pay a dividend, but they don't. They used to, but they don't, haven't since 2022. But back in the day, they were very generous with dividends, so be nice to see that return perhaps, and keep listening because maybe that's on the cards. And let's talk about what they do. So essentially, they are a modern Western healthcare provider doing pathology, radiology, diagnostic. So it's all of this stuff here: molecular biology, parasites, histopathology, genetics, cytogenetics, endocrinology, nuclear radiology, and so on, ultrasounds, x-rays, ECGs, mammographies. And of course, there's all the, as well as there being obviously a growing population, there is as well an aging population into Egypt. There's far more older people. There's increasing levels of cancer and different things. And of course, things like parasitology is quite a big thing in Egypt because of just the um, creatures that live there, the snakes and different things, and bugs. So yeah, there's a lot of demand for these services. And this IDH will has grown profits. Its profits were just over £500 million Egyptian pounds back in 2017. Since then, they've tripled. So bearing in mind that obviously the exchange rate has collapsed and so on. So if we discount by 61%, which is the in the sort of time period, then you can still see, like compared to 2017, that profits are still higher, even taking into account the exchange rate. So lots to like. That's the growing revenue. This little grey splodge by there was COVID. So they obviously made some money out of COVID testing back in the day, and then that stopped in 2022. And you can see profits generally increase. This splurge of profits again was COVID. So there's if you take out the COVID element, there's growing profits. Jordan, same, growing profits, growing revenue. Nigeria, growing revenue with a dip here, but you can see loss making until this year. So there's some historical issues there. And Sudan, you can see, has dwindled away to zero because of the war. So there's one branch still, or one branch that's been reopened recently in 2025, and you can see here sporadic profits. So kind of break even and not much more. So that's the history. Saudi Arabia is not on there because it's new this year. So you can sort of see some really good numbers. This is the same numbers, but sort of looked at a bit closer, and we can see growing net profit, growing number of tests, growing number of patients. But it's interesting, the patients are not growing that fast. It's the number of tests that are growing. So in other words, you've got similar numbers of people, but making more use of the facilities is how to look at that. So if we move on to look at the first quarter, so we've got the first quarter results from IDH. That what we see is the EBITDA margin grows to 31%, adjusted profit grows from 9% to 14%. So there's a big jump in the first quarter. If we consider that in the comparative in the first quarter of last year, there was a very large currency gain. So if you take that out, you actually see doubling of net profits year on year, even though the headline numbers is that profits shrank 39%. The bit that you've got to sort of adjust out is the extraordinary gains from FX gains and FX losses. So if you take out the FX gain, what you're actually seeing is an underlying performance that's over doubled. And as I say, the EBITDA margin has increased as well, 28 to 31 comparatively. So it was an improvement there, and that's the 9% to 14% I'm talking about in the article. Gross profit margin from 37 to 40%. So if we zoom out now and we say, well, let's look at 7 years of performance, okay? And what I've done is I've taken the first quarter and multiplied it by 4. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily reflective of my forecast of what the 2025 performance is going to look like, but it just gives us somewhere to start from. So what we see is, of course, we see extraordinary performance in 2021 due to COVID and COVID testing. We then see underperformance in terms of profit, underperformance in 2022 and 23. But again, what we see is, I've drawn some lines in here to sort of show the underlying direction of travel. So dark orange is the adjusted EBITDA earnings year on year, so 2019 to 2025. As I say, that's multiplied by 4 to just give it a comparative to 2024 and behind. This outsized result here of profit and EBITDA earnings, as I say, is the COVID effect. But we see growing net profits, growing EBITDA profits in each period, and that's in Egyptian pounds. Okay, so I keep sort of emphasizing the currency that I'm talking about, because we're going to look at profitability and GBP in a minute, just again to kind of give some context. And it's fair to say that there's a number of other things going on that uh, that if you went back 7 years, there was quite a lot of patients that were essentially patients sponsored by the Egyptian government that were doing health campaigns for things like attempting to eradicate hepatitis. So that kind of government program type approach has dwindled away to nothing. Again, the Egyptian government aren't doing those kinds of grandiose campaigns now, but instead it's all it's a mixture of two types of customer. You've got contracted customers that essentially are like Bupa, is probably the best way to describe them. They're sort of, either getting health insurance through their employment or through the government if they're a government worker, or through a trade union. It's sort of some sort of syndicated health cover, and they're claiming and getting tests through that. So the way that that works is those syndicates negotiate lower rates, so they get cheaper prices, but obviously you get bulk purchases. So you've got then another audience, which is what's called the private walk-in. So the way it works in Egypt is, if you go to your GP and I don't know, the GP says, "Oh, I think you ought to get an MRI scan done on your knee that's swollen up." The GP doesn't then refer you to the NHS hospital, and you go on a waiting list for however many years. What you then do is you get like a little slip from the GP saying, "I need an MRI scan." You can then go and arrange that yourself, and you do go and arrange that yourself. There's no concept of being referred and going on a waiting list. Instead, you immediately go private, or you go private as soon as you can afford to, and that's what's called a walk-in patient. And you would pay privately to have the MRI scan. You take the MRI scan, walk that back to the GP, and then he'll say, "Oh yes," or walk back to the consultant, and the consultant will say, "Oh yes, looking at your MRI scan, I can see, you've got whatever it is wrong with your knee." Okay, so it sort of works like that in Egypt. So it's quite different to the NHS in the UK. But what we see is growing numbers of tests, and to some extent growing numbers of patients, although there is a drop off here. Now, the other thing to say is that in the first quarter, that was Ramadan. So this number here is quite a lot lower than the full year, comparatively here, just because Ramadan fell in the first quarter, and the numbers were much lower as a result. So what we're going to now do is look at all of this as GBP numbers. So what I've done is I've not done anything more than just use like a year-end number, okay, in GBP terms. But what I wanted to understand was, it's all well and good looking at these Egyptian numbers going up and up and up, but obviously exchange rate is going down and down and down. So in real terms, what's been happening? So what we see is, in real terms, or I say in real terms, not in real terms, is in GBP terms. So in terms of their translated profit, as for you as a shareholder buying well, technically you're buying a US dollar denominated share, just to complicate it even further. But I suppose understanding it as a British investor, what we see is, again, this is the outsize result from COVID, from the COVID year. So I suppose if you ignore that result there, what we see is, in terms of net profit, so we see growing net profit, shrinking net profit, and now growing net profit is my interpretation of there, but only growing net profit over the past 3 years. So we can see, the business took a hit from here to here, post COVID, which to be fair, that happened in the UK just the same. That the number of operations, due to lockdown, due to disruption, due to supply chain problems, all of that is true of the UK as well. That there was a backlog of untreated people when you got to sort of 2023, 2024. Because I remember sort of people saying about this, that they'd been on a waiting list for X number of years and had ended up going private and different things. So what I sort of see, and again, this is a bad month because of Ramadan, but I see a growing, GBP terms, growing earnings and profit, and steady EBITDA, but growing net profit. Okay, that's my interpretation of the business performance. So I think the other thing I would just point out is to say, well, what's happening in terms of operations? Not literally, but in terms of business operations. So what we see here is, this line here is the Egyptian, in terms of Egyptian pounds, the net profit per patient. So I'm showing you growing profits in terms of Egyptian pounds per test, which is the green line, which is this lower arrow that you see here, as well as the profit per patient, which has gone from um, 300 to 600, so has doubled. And then what we see is the revenue. The revenue are these blocks. So revenue per test has grown, and revenue per patient has grown and has accelerated. In actual fact, we see here, this is quite a sharp acceleration upwards that we see here in Egyptian pound terms. So um, this, by the way, is interesting because what the business decided to do was increase its prices to reflect inflation in 2025. So we see a sharp acceleration here. So what we are also seeing there is a kind of inelasticity of demand, that even though they've put up their prices, the number of patients has not dropped, because we see the number of patients in this chart here. And the number of patients, I suppose arguably you could say it's slightly lower, which again I would argue back is due to Ramadan. But essentially the number of patients is more or less steady over these 3 years. They are tolerating higher prices. So let's look at the same thing again in GBP terms. So again, outsized result in 2021. Um, and what we see, and I think this is incredibly encouraging, the revenue per patient in GBP terms is steady. Okay, yes, it dipped in 2024, but is steady 2022, 2023, 2025. And obviously this is a slow quarter because of Ramadan. I'm probably saying that too many times, but you get the idea now. This per test revenue is accelerating in 2025, and what we see is net profit per test is steady, and net profit per patient is steady. So for me, that's encouraging. That is encouraging that, if we take for the, so compared to back here, back to 2021, like the business is at less than half the price it was back in 2021, when fundamentally per patient, per test, in GBP terms, okay, ignoring the loss, or the loss of value of the Egyptian pound, it's actually sort of steady. So that for me is encouraging. What we now move on to, this is the underlying data that I collated from the different years of accounts. That's the exchange rate that prevailed at the end of each of those years, or each of those periods. So you can see it was, one British pound was 4.3 Egyptian pence in this year, in 2019, and it fell to 1.5 pence in 2025, Q1 2025. So that's the underlying data. This is very interesting as well, the recurring revenue. So I talked about walk-in patients and contract patients. So what we see here, and this is in this is in Egyptian pounds, thinking about it. So this is the gross profit per patient. This is the split of patients. This is the number of patients, and therefore this is the total of gross profit for those splits. So what we see is the comparing it to 2019 to 2024, we see in Egyptian pound terms, the walk-in patients are now earning 3.5 times more profit, whereas the contract patients are paying 50%, or contributing 50% more profit in 2024. Okay, now that's in Egyptian terms. Okay, so The strategic price rises was something I mentioned, that they've strategically introduced price hikes. Um, so what we see, if we introduce 1Q25 to this, is that what we see is, the split was 68-32. Uh, the number of patients between these, therefore, were six. And again, these are sort of multiplying the numbers out by times four quarters to get a comparative. But we see the number of contract patients rise, the number of walk-in patients fall. So it was 0.37 times 4 is 1.51. So obviously that's a big negative, but once again, Ramadan. But what we see is a massive increase. Gross profit for contract patients rise by a billion Egyptian pounds. A billion Egyptian pounds. Now that for me is a very exciting number. Because these are the recurring income. You see, these are the recurring income, and what we see is the per patient has more than doubled. Um, and here, this is slightly down, or quite a bit down. But again, this is sort of perhaps an erroneous quarter because of Ramadan. That's why I'm very excited to see the numbers for the first half, to see the Q2 numbers, because if we see a pickup here, as well as a consistent increase here, then the profits that I think we're going to see are going to be tremendous, really, really tremendous. I mean, you can kind of see these sort of bear them out a little bit anyway. That you can see revenue is up 28%, revenue per patient is up 35%. So it's sort of echoing what I've done here, but perhaps what I've done here is split it out according to whether they're contracted or walk-in, just to kind of understand the numbers better than are disclosed. So, I mean, the sort of follow on to that is that, again, what I did was I looked at whether 1Q was indicative. Um, so it was interesting when I looked at it for 2024, 1Q24 was only 12.5% of the patients. So when I sort of say, oh, the numbers are well down, they're 537 versus 724. I mean, if you double up that number, because it was 12.5% of the total rather than 25% of the total, in other words, you multiply the number by 8 rather than by 4, then obviously that 700 to 1,000 is a massive increase. As would that be, well, it would still be down, but it would be about 1,600 versus 2,200. So we would see some really, really exciting numbers. And when I say exciting numbers, I'm kind of talking, so maybe 7.5 to 15 million additional profit on top of existing profits. So looking at these are sort of the annualized profits. So we can see, whilst the GBP net profits fell in 2023, they're fairly steady, and 14.7, 16.1, 17.9, obviously less than the 2021 COVID bump, but they're not dramatically lower than back here when when the share traded at many times its current price. I'd also point out that it's got a strong balance sheet, so it's gone from net debt to net cash. It does have some pretty hefty debt and pretty hefty debt interest payments, but it's working on those. So again, that's you can see there some of those are. You can see there 28.25 plus 1% is 29.25% interest rate. So they're paying down their debt quite quickly, and probably a good thing too. Strong management team. You can read this for yourselves, but Gulf Marine. This guy is chairman and is also, I think, non-executive perhaps of Gulf Marine and Yellowcake. Uh, some really solid people running the show. So yeah, I guess to summarize then, I would say that you've got to obviously be happy with the idea of investing in something where you're tied to the fortunes of Egypt. Could there be another devaluation of the Egyptian pound? Well, yes, of course, that could happen. But equally, could there be a devaluation of the British pound, which would then make your investment in Egypt look smart? I mean, it happened under Liz Truss, and that was 3 years ago, folks. So I guess you could sort of argue it both ways. So, and I'd also sort of point out that last year I covered a stock called Capital Georgia that people would sort of level the same criticisms. Oh, there's the risk of war, there's the risk of currency, there's the risk of valuation, and blah 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 blah. And that share is trading at over double what it was when I included it 20 months ago. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about this idea. But at the end of the day, this is not advice. This is just me giving my own personal opinion. I'm not connected to this company and not involved in this or any company I talk about on this YouTube channel. Um, yeah, I guess I like the direction that they're heading in. I like the growth story into Saudi Arabia, into Nigeria, the capability that they would have to repeat their business model into other countries. I like the fast-growing GDP. So yeah, for me, as I say, I feel pretty keen on this one. But we'll know more when we see the half year results. I mean, certainly it feels like somebody knows something for it to be going up as much as it has. It's gone up by about 50%. Do I think half a dollar is kind of now makes it expensive? Well, no, not at all, because relative to history, as I say, when I was showing you, how much profit it was making in GBP terms back here, it doesn't justify the difference. This valuation here. Relative to its capability to earn profits seems very reasonable to me. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hope that's been a useful video to watch, and look out for more videos in due course. Oak signing off. Cheerio for now. Cheerio.